I'm Marcus Reed, a black CEO. When people hear that title, they imagine I'm welcomed everywhere with smiles and firm handshakes. But there are mornings when even a single bank card in my hand becomes an excuse for someone to doubt me. That day, I walked into the bank in a crisp suit. Tom, the security guard, stopped me right at the door. VIP Lounge isn't open to regular customers. This card, maybe you found it somewhere? The words landed cold like a blade straight into my pride. Inside, I went to see Linda, the teller. Her smile was sweet but dripping with vinegar. Are you sure this account belongs to you? She said, loud enough for the entire line behind me to hear. And then, a white man named Clark cut in. If he's a CEO, then I must be the president. Laughter rippled through the shiny, polished lobby. The final blow came when Mr. Harris, the bank manager, arrived. I thought he would clear things up. Instead, he tapped his pen on the desk, his voice hard as steel. You'll need to show proof of ownership, otherwise we can't process this. That's when I knew the problem wasn't paperwork, it was my skin color. But from moments like that, I learned to stand taller. I believe the truth always finds its voice. And that day, when the screen behind the counter lit up, it didn't need me to raise mine. The bank's own system spoke for itself, confirming me as the owner, the CEO. The entire room went silent, a heavy, shameful silence, because the racist ones had just been exposed by the truth itself. If you've ever faced injustice like this, share this story, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the moments when justice speaks for itself. Now, let's go back to the very beginning, when I first stepped through those bank doors. My name is Marcus Reed, a name tied to million-dollar contracts, tense boardroom meetings, and sleepless nights building a company from scraps. Yet that morning, I wasn't walking into a negotiation with investors. I wasn't preparing for a business summit. I was just walking into a bank. A place that should have been familiar, safe, professional. My suit was pressed, documents neat in hand. I carried the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what he's worth. And right at the door, that confidence hit a wall. Sorry, sir, you got paperwork for this? The low, scratchy voice of Tom, the security guard, cut across my path like a pair of shears. I looked up. His eyes weren't asking. They were already excluding. I handed him my priority client card. Gold. Polished. My name engraved on it in bold, clear letters. Tom took one glance, smirked. This card, maybe you found it somewhere? For a moment, the air froze. The bank's marble lobby, tall ceilings, chandelier lights gleaming overhead, shrunk into a box holding only me and his suspicion. Me, the man who'd built a company brick by brick, now forced to prove to a security guard that my card wasn't picked up off the street. There's a kind of silence that isn't peace. It's contempt, thinly veiled. Footsteps slowed behind me. Curious eyes lingered. People love watching a spectacle, especially one dripping with irony. A black man in a tailored suit held up like a suspect. I looked at Tom. A thin smile tugged at my lips. Not forgiving, not submissive. Sarcastic. Because I knew the trap had been set long before I spoke. And it wasn't even subtle. It was crude, clumsy, laughable. I said slowly, if I picked up this card, I must have picked up the name on it too. Strange how it happens to match mine exactly. Tom said nothing. But his eyes didn't soften. He handed the card back, nodding stiffly for me to pass. The door opened, but I knew this wasn't an isolated moment. It was the opening note of an ugly symphony waiting inside. And I had no idea that little seed of doubt would grow into 6 conflicts, each one forcing me to flip this entire story on its head. If that was the welcome at the door, imagine what was waiting at the teller's counter. Tom's stare followed me even after returning the card. He stood there like I still owed him some explanation before stepping inside. His gaze drifted from my shoes up to my tie, scanning me like he was hunting for a flaw. Not to compliment, only to confirm I didn't belong. Got an appointment? Tom asked, low but firm. I nodded calmly. Don't need one for the VIP lounge. I've got the card. He smirked, half amused, half condescending. VIP lounge isn't for also for regular customers. The words slid out, thin and sharp as a blade. That's when I realized Even the card in my hand wasn't enough. Against prejudice carved this deep, no document mattered. Not here. Not with this skin. I exhaled slowly. I've known barriers like this all my life, built from stairs, not walls. You don't need signs or written rules. A 3-second look can turn any public space into forbidden ground. But that morning, I didn't stop. I locked eyes with Tom and took one slow step forward. My voice steady, neither raised nor low. If the VIP lounge isn't for regular customers, maybe that's why you should let me in, because I'm not regular. His smirk faltered. He didn't argue, he just stepped aside half an inch. But the suspicion clung to his face like shadow. I walked past him, feeling the eyes behind me trail along. A faint snicker. A whispered remark I couldn't quite catch. Didn't matter. I knew the story they were telling themselves. Some black guy in a suit, trying to squeeze into a world that wasn't his. Here's the bitter truth. Any reaction too strong would have turned into proof for their bias. In this game, restraint was the weapon. So I stayed silent, kept moving. My footsteps on the marble floor fell steady, a wordless declaration that I wasn't stopping. But deep down, I knew this was only the first crack. The real storm was waiting inside. And sure enough, I was about to meet a smile far deadlier than Tom's cold stare. The sweet, polished smile of Linda at the teller counter. I remember that moment clearly. Pulling the gold card from my jacket pocket, its surface catching the chandelier light overhead. My name engraved in full, sharp letters like a declaration. But instead of stepping back, Tom narrowed his eyes. "Maybe you found it somewhere?" he said again. One simple sentence. But it landed like a blade. It didn't just question the card. It denied my place in this room. As if a black man in a tailored suit couldn't possibly hold legitimate privilege. The air shifted. I caught the tap-tap of heels on marble, the snap of papers flipped behind me, the soft, mocking chuckles people thought were harmless. It wasn't a bank anymore, it was a stage. And I was the performance. I drew a long breath. Options flashed through my head. Push back, walk out, call someone higher up. I chose none. I chose silence. A silence I'd mastered after years of moments like this. I let a thin smile play at my lips. Not warm, not weak. A smile sharp enough to cut. "You think I found this card?" I asked evenly. "Funny. Maybe I found the name on it too. Amazing how it matches my ID." Tom froze for a second. His eyes flicked from the card to my face. The doubt didn't vanish. It just smoldered lower like coals waiting for wind. He handed the card back, stepped aside. I walked in spine straight, pace calm. But I knew I just crossed the threshold of a game I didn't start. Tom wasn't the real opponent. He was just the opening move, tossing out the first challenge to see how I'd play. That little blade he swung was nothing compared to what was coming. Because once they doubt you at the door, at the counter, the cuts always go deeper. And not from one person. From a whole system built to believe men like me always need more proof. I tightened my grip on the folder in my hand. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but control. Because I knew what was coming next. This wasn't just about a transaction anymore. It was a trial. One where the sweetest smile in the room, the teller Linda's, would cut far deeper than Tom's blunt disdain. Tom used the blade of open contempt. Linda would use velvet. And velvet blades leave the deepest scars. Would I keep my composure? Or would the truth get twisted again, right in front of everyone? I set the folder down on the polished counter. The moment it touched the surface, I met Linda's eyes. Her smile opened slowly, sweet as honey, yet with the aftertaste of vinegar hiding at the corners. It was a smile I'd seen hundreds of times in my life. A smile not meant to welcome, but to sugarcoat the suspicion waiting to be unleashed. Linda glanced quickly at my card, then looked up at me as if weighing a riddle. Her nod came slow, too slow to be called acknowledgement. Her eyes drifted from my documents to my tie, from the tie down to my shoes, then back up to my face. Each glance was a cut. Thin, sharp, deliberate. Good morning, Mr. Reed, Linda said, her voice soft as silk, thin as a wire. I'll check your information, but... She paused, dragging out the breath. This account is quite large. Are you sure it's yours? The whole room seemed to hear it. I caught the curious eyes of two people in line behind me. A man raised an eyebrow. A woman covered a laugh. Linda's question wasn't routine anymore. It had become public theater. The suggestion that a black man in a suit was here to prove he wasn't impersonating someone else. I smiled faintly. How interesting. I signed every contract that built this company. I deposited every cent into this account. But today, just to withdraw my own money, I need to convince you all over again. Linda didn't blink. Her smile stayed put, tilted with mock sympathy. You understand, don't you? She said sweetly. It's just procedure. Simple, really, but with sums like this, we have to be extra careful. Careful with who? I asked. My voice stayed soft, calm. But the smile on Linda's lips faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to see the truth. She wasn't protecting policy. She was protecting prejudice. Prejudice needs no signature, no official stamp. It only needs half a smile and a velvet voice to turn a transaction into an interrogation. I didn't look away. My faint smile met hers, two polite masks colliding. Beneath it, both of us knew this was a duel dressed as customer service. Linda typed a few keys, the clatter sharp as drum beats. She tilted her head, voice syrupy. We just need some additional documents. Business license or anything proving you really own this company. I chuckled lightly. Proof of the truth, huh? That's funny. I thought the account itself was proof enough. This time, a soft chuckle escaped the man behind me. Linda didn't look his way, but the corner of her mouth twitched. She'd planted the seed. Now the whole room was wondering, Marcus Reed, CEO, or just a man in a suit pretending? And I knew this was only the beginning. She'd drawn the blade. The deeper cuts were coming. If Linda was the candy shell, then beneath the sweetness was venom, and it only needed one voice in the room to spread it fast. She flipped through the folder like a judge reviewing a case. Every signature was there, every seal in place. Yet her eyes kept drifting, searching for some tiny flaw to weaponize. Are you sure this account is yours? She asked again, voice soft as honey, but with the sting of a needle underneath. I looked straight at her, no rush, no anger. I'd heard this question too many times in too many places. Always dressed differently. Always meaning the same thing. Does someone like you really belong here? I tapped a finger lightly on the counter. My voice was even. If I weren't sure, I wouldn't be here, and I certainly wouldn't be carrying every document you just reviewed. Linda raised a brow, smiling with her lips but not her eyes. She leaned over the keyboard, typing slow, deliberate strokes that dragged the tension longer. I noticed her fingers pause just enough to give the audience behind me time to whisper, "What's going on? Is he really the CEO?" The murmurs rose like sparks in dry grass. And Linda didn't stop them. No, she fed them with that half smile, polite on the surface, insinuating underneath. You understand, Linda said finally, voice smooth. This is standard. A transaction of this size, we need to verify everything thoroughly. Just to protect you. Protection. Sweet, hollow fake. Like someone pushes you off a ledge, then tells you it's for your own good. I tilted my head slightly, replying softly. If this is protection, maybe I don't need any more of it. Because what I feel isn't safety, it's suspicion in disguise. That landed. For a moment, Linda froze. Then she smiled again, adding another coat of polish to her mask. She didn't argue, just turned her screen away, as if hiding some secret from view. The whispers behind me grew, the eyes stayed fixed on me. This was no longer banking procedure. This was public theater. Linda was the director. I was the accused. And in every performance, there's always someone waiting to deliver the next laugh line. I didn't know it yet, but behind me, that someone was already stepping forward. Linda typed a few more keys, then looked up. Her smile stayed perfect. Her voice lowered, just enough for me to hear clearly, and enough for the audience behind me to guess the words. This transaction is quite large. Are you sure you're not making a mistake? The words fell cold and clear, a velvet-wrapped dagger. It questioned my ownership, turned me into the suspect. I met Linda's gaze. No surprise there, no shame either. Just the quiet confidence of someone who believed she'd spoken an obvious truth. A black man moving this much money? Something must be off. Behind me, the murmurs swelled, a cough, a stifled laugh. The bank was becoming an amphitheater. Linda had just tossed the first stone. I breathed evenly, voice steady. A mistake? If signing contracts, running a company, and moving legal funds is a mistake, then I must have been wrong for 10 straight years. Silence for a moment. Then it came. The sharp laugh from the man behind me. Later, I'd learn his name, Clark. His laugh turned Linda's velvet dagger into a chorus of mockery. Linda didn't apologize. Didn't correct him. She just shrugged lightly, typing again, her voice smooth as she murmured, "Don't take it the wrong way, I just have to be sure. It's my job. And with someone like you, we have to be even more careful." On its own, it might have sounded professional. But layered with the whispers, the stares, the laughter, it became a velvet blade leaving a slow, stinging cut. I sat up straighter. No loud words, no outburst. I knew better. Because the louder I got, the easier I'd fit the picture they wanted, the angry black man. No, I'd play this differently. I let the faintest smile curve my lips. "Thank you for the caution," I said softly. "Too bad it only seems to show up when it's me standing here." Linda's smile froze for half a beat. Clark laughed louder now, sensing his moment. The bank lobby had turned into a stage, every word twisted into performance. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about me, and whether they could frame me as the man out of place. And as the laughter echoed, I realized this was only the beginning. Because Clark was stepping closer, and his line was coming next. The air was strung tight as a wire when a throat cleared behind me. Dry, deliberate. As if someone wanted to announce, "I'm here too, and I've got something to say." I didn't turn right away. Sometimes silence is the first layer of armor. But then a man's voice rang out. Crisp, unhidden, edged with mockery. "If he's really a CEO," he drawled, stretching it so the whole room could hear, "then I'm the president." The laughter that followed didn't come from just one person. It rippled outward, starting in one corner, spreading through the rows of seats. Snickers, bursts, tight little laughs caught in chests. Each sound a needle on my skin, one after another, until the room became a chorus of ridicule. I still didn't turn. I kept my eyes on Linda, who was smiling as if that line had lifted a weight off her. She didn't object. She didn't ask the man to be quiet. Her silence was a sweet form of complicity. I smiled faintly. Not because the joke was funny, but because I knew this play too well. People choose public mockery to turn a person into group entertainment. The easiest way to erase someone isn't with evidence. It's with laughter. Once the crowd laughs, even truth can start to look like a punchline. Slowly, I turned. The man, mid-40s, white shirt, striped tie, hair shellacked into place, sat with legs crossed and arms folded, wearing the look of a man who believed that he had just scored a small win. His name was Clark. I'd never met him, but his proud eyes said enough. He was used to being right and being heard. "You're the president, huh?" I asked, my voice light as air. The room paused, unsure what I might do next. How fitting. I'm sitting in front of a bank employee who thinks she's the judge. A few surprised laughs popped, this time not at me, but at an unexpected reply. Clark frowned and sat up, but I didn't linger on him. I turned back to Linda and saw the confidence had drained a notch from her smile. I realized this was no longer just between me and Linda. The scene had widened into a play with an audience, an uninvited actor named Clark, and a stage made of marble and glass. In this performance, every word I spoke and every glance I gave became a prop. And I knew the only way to avoid becoming the joke was to turn their mockery into the blade that cut back. I breathed, letting a brief hush spread. The weight of it was enough to make Clark uneasy, and to knock Linda off her early rhythm. But I knew this was only the opening. After that first interruption, Clark wasn't finished. He was winding up for more, and I would have to choose. Keep silent or end the scene with a single, cutting line. Clark's voice boomed through the room like a match tossed into gasoline. If he's a CEO, then I'm the president of the United States. The half-joke, half-dare triggered a wave of loud laughter. It started as a few snickers, then cracked into a full, collective roar. The sound ricocheted off the high glass ceiling and washed across the lobby. I heard backslaps, smug nods, and saw eyes that no longer looked at me as a customer, but as a sideshow. I stood there, silent. For a split second, it felt like I was the only one not laughing. And in that moment, I understood the difference between a person and a character. They weren't seeing Marcus Reed, the man who'd built a company over 10 years of sweat. They were seeing a tragicomic character who had wandered onto their stage. Behind the counter, Linda said nothing, but her smile had changed. It wasn't the canned bank smile anymore. It was the smile of someone aligned with the crowd. Her silence was an invisible nod that let the wave roll on. Clark leaned forward, more pleased with himself. I've been coming here for years and never seen a CEO dressed like that, waiting in line like everybody else. A real CEO wouldn't end up in this situation. Laughter rose again, longer this time. Someone pulled out a phone, pecking at the screen like they were filing notes. Self-proclaimed CEO. Another man whispered to his friend, maybe a juicy impersonation case for tomorrow's papers. I let the laughter pass over me like surf. Because I knew, when a crowd laughs, they think they hold the power. But their uniform laughter only reveals the real weakness, their dependence on a baseless line. I turned to Clark and met his eyes. He brightened, certain he'd won. I didn't argue, didn't explain. I simply said, each word dropping like a pebble into still water. Well then, Mr. President, it's an honor to see you waiting on a transaction with the rest of us. The room went quiet. A few awkward chuckles flickered, but they didn't swell. They broke apart into stray pieces. Clark leaned back, his face pinched for a beat. Linda cleared her throat to reclaim the moment. She typed faster, as if dragging the scene back to business. But the eyes around me held on to that instant, the pivot where a gentle blade turned the momentum. I knew I wasn't out of the circle yet. The public comedy had just begun. If Clark felt stung, he wouldn't stop at one line. He'd try to make me the bigger target. I drew a breath and looked to Linda. Because when the crowd fades, the person behind the counter still holds the lever, and she hadn't let go. The question was, would the next strike come from Clark or from Linda? The laughter didn't die at once. It droned on, seeping into the cold stone walls and rolling back at me like an undertow. I didn't laugh. I didn't try to smother it. I stood still and let it circle. Clark grew bolder when I didn't explode. He leaned in, smiling with the confidence of a man who thought the room was on his side. Linda kept her eyes on her screen, but the curl at the corner of her mouth said she was enjoying the show. I glanced around. A few faces were tight-lipped, not laughing, not speaking. That silence wasn't support or dissent. It was the safest choice, and stay out of it. But that very neutrality made the louder voices carry farther. I knew if I fired back, the room would ignite into argument, and the story would collapse into a single label, an angry black man losing his temper. I'd seen that play too many times. So I chose silence. Silence wasn't defeat. It was a weapon I'd honed, sharpened by every denial I'd survived. It bought me time to watch. It made them sit with the sound of their own laughter, unmasked by any excuse. I looked at Clark, then at Linda, then at the people still giggling. I let my stare linger just long enough to make clear, this wasn't the silence of surrender. It wasn't the quiet of a cornered man. It was the stillness of someone studying the board, waiting for the exact moment to flip it. Clark stopped laughing first. Maybe he sensed it, something offbeat in the room. With my silence deepening, the next laughs came out thinner, more out of time. Without a conductor, the chorus of mockery unraveled into coughs and awkward breaths. Linda typed harder, keystrokes clacking like a metronome trying to fill the space. The more she typed, the more forced it sounded. The lobby wasn't buzzing anymore. It was shifting, slow, heavy, uncertain. I sat up straighter, fingers resting on the folder. No grand words, no lectures. But I knew, from this second on, the game had changed. I didn't have to silence them. My silence had started to do it for me. I let a thin smile edge my mouth, sending a quiet signal. Their laughter hadn't shaken me. It had only given me another reason to remember. But this was still the outer ring. My quiet countercut might dim the noise, but it wouldn't stop the next blows, and Linda, the one behind the counter, still held another weapon, the kind used by those who control the paperwork. The question was, when she moved, would I stay silent or lay down my real card? The clatter of Linda's keyboard stopped abruptly. The room, taut as a violin string, slackened as a man emerged from behind the counter. Early 50s, salt and pepper hair combed, neat, tight knot in his tie, a brisk, compact gait. Staff shifted aside at once, the way soldiers make room when a commander steps to the front. This was Mr. Harris, the branch manager. The lobby's murmurs thinned. His presence carried weight, an invisible gravity. A few people straightened in their seats, others fell quiet, as if his mere arrival reminded them who held the power to decide. For a moment, I almost believed things would be resolved, that a manager, with experience and authority, would know how to douse the ridicule that had flared up. For a moment, I mistook him for a rescue. He stepped to Linda's station and took the folder from her hands. His eyes moved over each page, quick, careful, the way someone reviews a high-stakes contract. I stood tall, waiting. Whatever chance at clarity remained seemed to sit in his hands. Then he looked up, eyes landing on me, mate. Not the look of a fair arbiter, of someone weighing facts, but of suspicion already decided. "You're Reed?" His voice was firm, stripped of ordinary courtesy. "I'm Marcus Reed, I answered evenly. He nodded slowly, then let the words fall like a verdict. "Can you present proof of company ownership?" The room seemed to hitch. A rustle of whispers returned. Clark chuckled behind me. Linda dipped her head to her screen, keys suddenly fascinating. I held his gaze and let a few seconds pass. Proof of ownership. Paperwork I'd never been asked to carry for a bank transaction. The demand meant one thing here. He didn't believe me. "Accounts, documents, contracts, everything's here," I said. "And that's still not enough?" Arms crossed, eyes cold, he replied, "Given the amount, we need to be certain. A real CEO doesn't mind proving it." I laughed once, dry, echoing in the wide lobby. "A real CEO doesn't mind proving it," I repeated, letting it hang. "So suspicion is the measure of status now?" Awkward silence seeped in. Some people looked away, others stared. The line had shifted. This was no longer a transaction. It had become a quiet courtroom. Me in the defendant's chair, Harris presiding from the bench. The rescue I'd expected wasn't coming. The manager hadn't arrived to unwind the mess. He'd come to cinch the noose. If a guard could doubt me at the door, and a teller could mock me at the counter, a manager could turn suspicion into policy. And once that happened, this stopped being about looks and tone. It became a knife driven straight on. I stood still, breathing slow, feeling the stakes lift to a higher tier. What I didn't expect was that the next blow wouldn't come from Harris alone, but it would be boosted by the crowd's complicit silence. I had waited for explanation, reassurance, even a quiet nod of acknowledgement. Instead, when Mr. Harris lifted his head, his voice hit like a strike, hard and unyielding. "Do you have proof of ownership?" Not a question. An order. It wasn't the tone of a man easing a misunderstanding, it was the tone of an officer interrogating a suspect. I met his eyes, then glanced at the neatly stacked papers on the counter. Everything was there, contracts, account info, valid records. None of it mattered. He wanted one thing only, a document beyond the norm, something no one brings to a bank errand. Around me, the whispers picked up again. Clark's small laugh reached my ear. Another voice hissed, "If he were really the owner, they wouldn't be asking. They wouldn't be asking like this." Those murmurs, like wind, lashed at the back of my neck. "You're saying," I asked slowly, "that everything on this desk isn't enough?" Harris didn't blink. "I'm saying if you're truly the owner, bringing proof shouldn't be difficult." A short, dry laugh escaped me. "So by your logic, my position isn't affirmed by the work I've done, nor by the documents in front of you, but by whether I can produce a paper almost no one ever needs to carry?" He didn't answer right away. Arms folded, eyes like steel. The silence weighed more than anything he could have said. It told me plainly, in his eyes, I was the one who must prove, not a client to be served. Linda stayed behind the counter, pretending to focus on the screen. But I caught the faint curve at her lip, the tiniest smile, as if she were enjoying the sight of me standing before her judge. I exhaled. In that instant, it was obvious they weren't searching for truth. They were searching for a reason to keep their bias intact. And if they couldn't find one, they were willing to invent it. "Perhaps you'd like me to go home, open a safe, dig out that document, and come back?" I asked, voice light as air. Harris tilted his head, crisp reply. "If you're truly a CEO, that shouldn't be difficult." With that, any hope of fairness dimmed. I felt the whole room tilt toward him. Bitterly, I realized, the man I'd hoped would steady the scene had arrived only to brand me a pretender. I tightened my grip on the folder and kept my voice level. I knew if I let anger flare, they'd win the story. But if I held my silence and waited for the moment, their own words would become the evidence against them. I scanned the room, then looked back at Harris with a thin smile. And in that moment, I knew the worst part was still coming. Because when a manager sides with doubt, the system behind him will pull the net tighter. The only question was, which procedure would they use to throw the next punch? For a beat, I stood still, letting Harris's demand hang in the air. He didn't care about the papers. He didn't want clarity. What he wanted wasn't in the folder at all. It was something I could never change. That I am a black man. Right then, it clicked. They weren't verifying the account. They were verifying my skin. The truth bled across the moment like ink spreading on white paper. From the doorway, Tom's stare. At the counter, Linda's sugared smile. Behind me, Clark's cheap joke. And now Harris's hard command. Each was a slice from the same picture. No matter my title or track record, I was being viewed through suspicion's lens. I looked at Harris and saw it plainly. He didn't want proof. He wanted submission. He wanted to watch me scramble, run home, bow my head, and return with a paper to prove I wasn't lying. He wanted to turn a CEO into a petitioner. I tilted my head, letting a small smile show, not pleasure, but recognition. The smile of a man who sees the game laid bare. "Mr. Harris," I said evenly, "I've given you all the documents. But maybe what you really want to verify isn't in this folder. You want to verify me." He hesitated a fraction, then lifted a brow. "What are you implying?" "I'm saying," I replied, "this isn't about confirming an account. It's about confirming a prejudice." The lobby stirred again. Murmurs, a few headshakes, a few under-the-breath agreements. Clark laughed, but this time it didn't spread. It crackled dry and died, as if he felt the mood shifting too. Linda looked up, a flicker crossing her eyes. Maybe she hadn't expected me to name the thing they always hide behind the word procedure. Arms crossed tight, Harris's face hardened. "You're mistaken. These are the rules." "Rules are fair," I answered softly with steel. "It's your application that isn't." In that instant, I felt the room arrive at a fork. No more cheap jokes. No more small-time derision. This was the moment the bias got called by its name. And once spoken aloud, it wouldn't slip back into silence. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I let the quiet after my words grow heavy as lead, forcing everyone to sit with what they had just witnessed. Harris held his stance, rigid, but his eyes flickered. Because no matter how he denied it, everyone in the room understood. This scrutiny had never been about money. It had always been about color. I sat straighter, palm on the folder, eyes locked on him. And in the stretching silence, I knew they weren't done. If my skin was the test, then the only question left hanging was, how many more tests would they invent before they were forced to face the truth? My folder sat pinned beneath Linda's hand on the counter. She slid it aside, voice honeyed and razor thin. "We'll need to run additional checks." The words landed like an open-ended waiting ticket, an entry to the country of delay. A place where time doesn't move by the wall clock, but by the breath of those testing my patience. I looked down at the folder. Valid documents, complete signatures, clean figures. Yet with one sentence, everything became uncertain. Their power lived in turning the obvious into the ambiguous, and the ambiguous into a pretext to stall. I took the hard customer chair, the back pitched just enough to make waiting feel compulsory. Linda bent to her keyboard, but she wasn't in a hurry. Her fingers drifted lazily over the keys as if each character could buy another minute. The bank's air thickened. Heels clicked on stone. Papers rustled. Customers whispered. Together they scored the theater of further checks I was obliged to sit through. I glanced around. Clark was still there behind me, smirking whenever Linda looked over. Tom, the guard at the door, passed by, paused to study me with a private satisfaction, then moved on. And Harris, the manager, kept an appropriate distance, close enough to witness. None of them needed to say more. Additional checks functioned as a temporary sentence. Arms folded, I stayed silent. Inside, frustration boiled like steam strangled by a kettle's lid. But I knew an outburst would spring the trap. Their aim wasn't only to stall, it was to see how long it took for me to lose control. I drew a long breath, let the anger settle. Instead of watching Linda, I fixed on the wall clock. The second hand crept, a slow drumbeat reminding me they controlled the time. I didn't. A bitter image flickered through my mind, a courtroom where the judge sips tea while the defendant is made to sit, waiting for a verdict that never comes. I was that defendant, tried not by law but by arrogance dressed as procedure. Linda tapped a few more keys, looked up, and smiled thinly. Please be patient. Files like these, blah, we can't rush. Again, the room murmured. Eyes swung my way, no longer curious, now judgmental. Maybe he does have a problem. Why else would it take so long? I closed my eyes briefly. I knew the tactic. Delay doesn't only test me, it plants an idea in the crowd. Where there's smoke, there must be fire. When I opened them, I knew I had stepped deeper into their game. They wouldn't stop at a short scene. They'd stretch it out until waiting itself became an invisible indictment. Only question left. How long until they play the next card, the one that turns delay into outright denial? I sat upright in the hard chair by the counter, hands clasped on my knees. From there I could feel every gaze. Not all were openly mocking, but each carried the same hue. Scrutiny, doubt, or the practiced pretense of not looking while very much looking. Rooms like this have a special kind of silence. It's never truly silent. It's full of small sounds, fragmentary gestures, and above all, eyes. I felt them like needles through my suit, clinging to every small movement. Time slowed. The clock dragged. I breathed deep to stay steady. Just as I found a sliver of quiet, a voice floated from the hallway. Dry, mocking. Everyone's a CEO these days. Another employee, arms full of folders, passing by. He didn't stop, didn't need to meet my eyes. He tossed the line and kept walking, leaving a bitter echo behind. Short sentence. Big blast radius. It turned private suspicion public, like a curtain pulled out back on the room's unspoken thought. Maybe Marcus Reed is just a man in a suit calling himself a CEO. An older man in the waiting area nodded, as if confirmed. A young woman clicked her tongue and whispered to a friend. Even Clark found fresh fuel, laughing out loud. I kept my posture, eyes forward, though heat rose to my face. I knew this line. I'd heard it in boardrooms, conference corridors, even at formal dinners. What was different today was its purpose. Not to jab privately, but to brand me out loud in front of the room. I let a thin smile surface. Not for them, for me. Sometimes the only way to break a farce is to let it reveal its full absurdity. I dipped my head slightly, voice even, loud enough for a few nearby to hear. Maybe so. Everyone claims CEO these days. Shame is, when the responsibility shows up, not everyone holds it. No need to raise my voice. The words spread like a hairline crack. Laughter caught, then faltered. Clark frowned. The young woman turned away. Linda pretended to focus harder on her screen. But I knew they weren't done. The goal wasn't a single joke. The goal was to turn waiting into a public trial. Every word and gesture enlisted to shore up a bias. I looked toward the inner office door, the place where the real decision would come from. What waited wasn't review. It was a script designed to pull me to the edge. And I knew the next blow wouldn't be another hallway quip. It would arrive officially, from the mouths of those who speak in the name of procedure. Time crawled. Each second a dull blade shaving slivers off my patience. Linda kept up her pantomime, eyes glued to the screen, fingers tapping with deliberate slowness. Each click sounded like a gavel in a courtroom, But this wasn't a court. There was no judge, no jury, no counsel. Instead, there was a room full of people whose cold eyes played prosecutor, audience, and executioner all at once. Clark, a few rows back, sat arms crossed, lips curled, savoring the spectacle. Tom ambled by and paused again, taking one more lingering look, the private thrill of a man who believes he's in the right place. Every time I looked up, I met another gaze. The young woman whispering to her friend, eyes sharpened with doubt. A middle-aged man shaking his head as if confirming his own conclusion. A black man in a suit, sitting there, couldn't possibly be the CEO of a major company. My chest grew heavier, not with shame, but with the nakedness of it all. I had built a business from small numbers, signed dozens of contracts, put hundreds on payroll, and in this moment, all of it had been reduced to a single dangling question. Are you sure this account is yours? No evidence required, no reasoning needed, just eyes installed where laws ought to be. I sat still and drew a long breath. If they wanted a public trial, I would let them become the actors in their own play. I didn't need to shout to prove the truth. The quieter I stayed, the more their eyes reflected their own deceit. But silence has a cost. I felt the weight build, second by second, a slow, precise mental grind. Linda glanced up, met my eyes, then dropped her gaze like someone who knows her role in a rigged game has just flashed. And then I saw it clearly. This wasn't mere delay. It was a tribunal where I was the defendant and the verdict had already been written. The seconds stretched, merciless. I sat straight-backed, knowing I'd been put on trial, not by law, but by contempt wrapped around the room. The question hanging now, would they stop at delay, or take one step further and turn waiting into a flat refusal? Time stretched so long the wall clock itself turned into a heckler. Each tick-tock felt like a pat on the shoulder reminding me, you're still here, still not recognized. I looked around. People who came after me had already left, while I remained fixed in place like a character nailed to a chair. Finally, Linda returned with another employee. My folder sat neatly in their hands, but instead of a clear decision, I got the familiar apology. Smooth as if pre-printed. Sorry, we can't process this yet. Those 4 words, can't process this yet, fell like a stone into a still pond, sending out thin ripples. No reason why. No new timeline. Just a second open-ended waiting ticket, colder than the first. I leaned back and looked straight at Linda. Her face kept its polite mask, but her eyes slid away, refusing to meet mine. It was the dodge of someone who knows they're part of a farce, while pretending they're just doing their job. Sorry, I repeated evenly. Is that answer for me or to soothe yourselves? No reaction. Linda only shrugged and bent over the folder as if those papers had suddenly become urgent. But the truth was already bare, they weren't stuck. This was a manufactured gridlock, built to see how I would react. Clark, still behind me, let out a dry chuckle. Maybe they just find the whole thing suspicious. If a CEO's file gets held this long, something's off. A few others nodded along. The air grew denser, like a trap closing in. Instead of anger, I let a sardonic smile surface. I leaned in slightly toward Linda, voice low but clear. The most interesting thing today isn't that my file's on hold. It's that you believe delay can be turned into truth. Linda flinched, lifting her head. Harris moved closer from a distance, still keeping space. He didn't intervene, he watched, like a judge waiting to see if the defendant self-destructs. I sat upright and swept the room with my eyes. Apology isn't an answer. It's a thin curtain over a different fact. You're not doubting my documents. You're doubting me. Silence dropped. Some people looked rattled, others looked away. Under it, I could hear my heartbeat. I knew I'd hit the core of their game. They called it procedure. They excused it as caution. But at the root, it was a trap of bias dressed up as professionalism. I leaned back, hands folded on my lap, and let the quiet rise. I didn't need to win right now. I only needed to make the room see. Delay itself was the clearest confession. But I also knew the play wasn't over. When this staged stalemate fell apart, they'd have to make a new move. That would be when the truth would have to step into the light. Sorry, Linda echoed, and the corner of her mouth ticked upward. Not comfort. The lift of someone who thinks she's caught a cheat. like a teacher holding a test back, feigning pity while her eyes gleam with the thrill of unmasking. I looked directly at her. There was no sincerity in that sorry. It played like a stock soundtrack, meant to hide the pleasure underneath. Behind the polite syllables sat the real message. We know you're pretending, and we won't let you through. The room shifted at once. A few customers lifted their eyes from their phones, watching openly now. Clark couldn't resist a brittle laugh, a bell tolling in the quiet. Tom, the guard, glanced over from the door, eyes half believing, half concluding. I stayed still, breathing slow, careful not to let heat reach my face. Inside, I understood. They were pushing me to the edge. Every word and smirk wasn't a search for truth. It was the staging of a secret trial with a predetermined guilty. Sorry we can't process it yet, Linda repeated, sweeter now, as if bestowing favor. But her eyes weren't sweet. They were the eyes of someone who had locked a door and tossed the key. A thin smile edged my lips. Shame, I said quietly. Because I recall apologies usually come with repair. Here, you're using it as an indictment. Someone in the seats let out a small, awkward laugh, not at me, but at the tension. Clark cut in quickly. If everything were clear, it wouldn't take this long, would it? The room seemed to lean toward him again. A tide of probing eyes rolled back onto me. I could feel the weight pressing my shoulders. Instead of bowing, I sat straighter, set both hands on my thighs, and lowered my voice. Fascinating. People usually look for truth in documents, in numbers. Here, you're looking for it in a smirk. Linda blinked, startled a beat, then smoothed her face. From a distance, Harris stayed silent, but I could see his satisfaction. He'd handed Linda the reins and now watched like a director as the scene played. I knew I was standing at the edge of manufactured stalemate. They could keep stalling, keep feeding doubt, and each minute would convince the room that I wasn't credible. But in that very stalemate, I found an opening. It lived inside their smugness. When someone smirks too soon, it usually means they think the game is over. That's when they're most exposed. I leaned back, letting the irony in my smile show. If they wanted to turn delay into a verdict, I would turn that verdict into proof. Proof that this wasn't a bank verifying a file, but prejudice confessing itself. One question remained. When would I make the move that silences the room? I sat quietly for a few seconds, deepening the pause. Linda bent down, pretending to recheck the folder, while Harris stood behind her, arms crossed as if readying a final ruling. Clark leaned forward in his chair, waiting for me to crack. They all believed I was about to fold. I let a small, unforced smile appear, the look of someone who's just noticed an interesting detail. Then I spoke, slow and clear enough to make heads lift. Oh, then let your own system answer. A light line, but with a different weight. No argument, no pleading. I handed the judgment to what they trust absolutely, their banking system. Linda froze for a beat. Her fingers stopped mid-key, a small tremor in them. Harris's brow creased. His gaze sharpened as if the words grated. Clark laughed again, but this time the sound lacked confidence, like a man trying to balance on a thin plank. I straightened, eyes fixed on Linda. Every major transaction I've made goes through this system. It records every figure, every signature, every confirmation. If you still doubt me, let your own system prove who the owner really is. Silence settled. The whispers that followed were different now. Less ridicule, more curiosity. What will the system say, and if it confirms him, then what? Linda tried to hold composure and tapped a few keys. Her screen flickered, then filled with lines of data. I watched her swallow, eyes cutting toward Harris. He stayed arms folded, saying nothing, waiting for her to manage it. I tilted my head, gentle but cutting. Or is the fear that your system will betray your bias? A few nearby chuckles slipped out, this time not at me, but at the discomfort gathering at the counter. Clark's face tightened, unhappy with the shift. Slowly, Linda turned the monitor toward Harris. I couldn't see everything, but I saw enough. My name alongside the designation. Owner. Chief Executive Officer. That brief glimpse told me I'd planted the seed in the right soil. I didn't add another word. I let them sit with it. Let them feel how thin their gridlock looked now. When the system has the record, denial is hard to stage. The silence in the room turned close and airless. No one wanted to speak. Any sentence might read like an admission. I eased back in the chair, the smile still resting on my lips. I didn't need to raise my voice or argue. One line was enough, and the very technology they worshipped was doing the unveiling. In that moment, I knew the set they'd built had begun to crack. The question was no longer whether I could prove it, but how long they'd try to hide it from a room that had just seen the truth. The room sank into a taut silence. Linda kept typing, her fingers trembling. Harris stood behind her, arms locked across his chest, eyes fixed on the screen. Clark shifted in his seat, as if loading up another joke to puncture the tension. But before he could open his mouth, the whole room inhaled at once. Because the big screen behind the counter lit up. Cold, blue-white light flooded out, washing faces in a mix of surprise and dread. Numbers and lines of text resolved, enlarged so boldly no one could pretend not to see. At the very top, larger than anything else, Marcus Reed, owner, chief executive officer. The moment cracked like lightning in a clear sky. Every head lifted, forced to stare at the truth they'd spent hours sidestepping. No more files held hostage, no more crooked smiles, no more barbed asides to cover it over. Their own system had spoken. I said nothing. I sat still, watching my name blaze on the screen like an unerasable seal. Seconds slid by and no one spoke because any word now would clang like a clumsy excuse. Linda froze, hands on the keyboard. Her eyes flitted, then dropped. She couldn't meet mine. Harris tried to keep his stern mask, but the twitch at his mouth betrayed him. And Clark, the loudest voice all afternoon, fell quiet, shifting his feet, unable to find a comfortable place to set them. I tipped my head, letting a thin smile show. Not to gloat, just to mark the turn. I'd won on the only point that mattered. The truth had outed itself. The most ironic part? It hadn't come from me, but from the very altar of their faith, the bank's system. I didn't have to prove a thing. I didn't have to raise my voice. An unfeeling machine had done what prejudice-laden people would not: recognize me. The lobby's mood flipped. The whisperers and snickerers avoided my gaze. Some ducked to their phones. Others shifted in their seats, as if the distance between us had suddenly grown uncomfortably small. I didn't rush to break the silence. I let it stretch, forcing everyone to face the truth burning on that screen. Right now, silence did the loudest work. Then I turned to Harris. He said nothing, but his eyes sagged. A veteran manager knows the feel of a chessboard collapsing in his hands. I leaned forward and spoke just loud enough to carry across the room. Seems in the end your system is more trustworthy than a smirk. A few soft laughs popped, aimed not at me but at the absurdity of the people who'd just lost. But I knew this wasn't the final beat. With the truth laid bare, one question hung. Would they bow to it, or cling to whatever scraps of power they had left? The big display's light fell over the lobby like a courtroom lamp. No one could pretend they hadn't seen it. The letters rose slow and clear, as if etched into the air. Marcus Reed, owner, chief executive officer. I didn't lift a finger. The system they trust blindly had announced the facts. It didn't tremble, didn't harbor bias, didn't need to sneer. It simply recorded, and the record said everything. A thick hush wrapped the room. A few small coughs surfaced, then died. Clark, the noisiest of them all, stared at the screen, hunting for an angle to fight. But that line of text locked every exit. Linda sat motionless, hands still on the keys. The half smile she wore so easily was gone. Her eyes drifted, dodging, like someone just stripped of a mask. All those slow keystrokes from before now read like evidence of empty stalling. Harris, the seeming power center, stood rigid, scanning the crowd as if searching for support. No one volunteered. Phones lowered to faces. A few people let their eyes meet mine and dipped their heads, silent acknowledgments. I stayed still, hands on my legs, a faint smile flickering. Not prideful, simply the look of someone who knows this. Prejudice moves slowly, but truth will find the switch. The punchline was richest because it came from the place they thought would suffocate me. No one could deny it. They'd staged a whole play with the old lines: suspicion, delay, mockery. And now a single, simple screen had kicked the set down. I let the quiet linger, I wanted them to feel its weight, to sit with the sting of being struck across the face by truth with nowhere to turn. Silence made them look at each other, made them face the question, how long until your laughter becomes evidence of your own foolishness? I turned to Harris, voice low and clean. Looks like this system knows me better than the people standing in this room. The words fell like a cut. Harris pressed his lips tight. Clark fidgeted. Linda dropped her gaze. I didn't need another charge or accusation. The proof glowed above us, and everyone had seen it. In that moment, I was no longer the suspect. I was the mirror. And what it reflected back, that was what unsettled them most. Still, I knew the game rarely ends at revelation. Truth was out, but those who live on bias don't surrender easily. Would they swallow the bitter quiet, or flail one last time for a shred of control? When the screen magnified Marcus Reed, owner, chief executive officer, I didn't need to speak. It testified for me. Clark, the quip machine, opened his mouth to say something. Then the blue light hit his face and the words stalled. His grin snapped shut into a sheepish line. The triumphant laughter he'd been nursing all afternoon died like a speaker yanked from its socket. Linda, the velvet-gloved ringmaster, tapped the keyboard with a tremor. Yes, it does show, she stammered, unable to finish. Language betrayed her. Once the system speaks, every excuse sounds like a child's lie. Harris, the arms-crossed judge, dipped his head. Barely, yet it landed like a confession. The man who thought he held the scales now couldn't bear to look straight at the verdict. No one needed to explain it. The very technology they praise as transparent and objective had exposed them. Every minute before, each delay, each smirk, each snide aside lay there like crude cutouts in a failed farce. I sat tall and let my eyes pass over their faces. No one looked back. The customers who had laughed adjusted their posture, feigned interest in a phone, or stared at a newspaper they hadn't turned in 5 minutes. Their glee vanished, replaced by a heavy, awkward quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point fingers. Truth had done the pointing, and in that silence I heard a sound stronger than applause, the soft collapse of a crowd embarrassed by what the facts had just made of them. A brief smile crossed my lips, not to flaunt, but to say, you wrote the script. The system turned it into tragedy. Linda tapped a few more keys, striving for professional, but her shaking hands told on her. Clark hunched down, fully silent for the first time since I walked in. Harris exhaled hard and turned away, as if facing me now were impossible. It was technology, cold, impartial, unpersuaded, that did what the people here could not. It recognized me. And in that recognition, the bias peeled off without argument, without any defense from me at all. I knew this reversal wasn't just my vindication. It would leave a mark on everyone who had smirked, nodded, or stayed complicitly quiet. The wound would linger because it hadn't come from me. It had come from the very system they obey. I tilted my head, keeping the smile. And I wondered, after being stripped bare by their own technology, would they try me again, or swallow this bitter silence whole? I stood up. The chair let out a faint creak, a small sound that echoed through a room weighted by silence. I reached out and took back the folder still lying on the counter. Those familiar pages no longer needed to be evidence. The screen behind the counter had already said everything for them. I tucked the folder neatly under my arm and slowly turned. My eyes passed over each face. No more crooked smiles. No more crowd laughter. Everyone was frozen, like wax figures caught in their most embarrassing moment. Linda lowered her head, fingers woven together and clenched as if to stop their trembling. She no longer dared look at me, no longer had the nerve to put on that sweet smile. Her silence had lost its power. It had become a wordless confession. Harris still stood there, back straight, trying to hold on to composure. But his eyes had dropped, avoiding mine. The man who had folded his arms like a judge now bowed his head like a reluctant defendant. One swing of momentum from their own system had turned him from the one in control into the one exposed. Clark, the noisiest of them all, sat motionless, statue still. The sneer was gone. He pressed his lips together, eyes unfocused, hands laced in awkwardness. For him, silence was the sharpest punishment. being forced to swallow every joke he'd thrown. I let my gaze move slowly, not rushing. I wanted each person in that room to feel the weight of standing bare before the truth. No shouting, no theatrics, just silence, the searing kind that exposes everything. I dipped my head in a small final nod. Then my voice carried out, even and clear. You haven't exposed my ownership, you've exposed your bias. The words slid through the air. No one answered. They hung there and didn't dissipate, because they didn't need a reply. They were enough to put the period on this hidden trial. In that moment, I didn't just leave with the folder in my hand. I left with a closing line the whole room would be forced to remember. Not a line meant to browbeat, but to hold up a mirror. I turned and walked for the door. My shoes rang against the marble, each step a reminder that I wasn't the one humiliated today. They were the ones just laid bare. But I also knew this wasn't the end of the story. That silence would stick to them, linger in memory, an irritating echo every time they watched someone like me walk into that room. And the question I left behind was, how many more times will silence become the mirror for the prejudice they won't admit? I stopped at the counter, not raising my voice, not drumming my fingers. I didn't need to scold or shout to prove the truth. I needed only one sentence. Short, clean, and sharp enough to pierce the hush blanketing the room. You didn't expose my ownership, you exposed your bias. It didn't thunder like a storm, but it fell heavy, a stone into a still lake. The ripples reached every face. Linda froze, her hand arrested mid-turn of the file. Harris clasped his hands tighter behind his back, that firm jaw settling a notch lower. Clark leaned back, arms crossed, eyes skittering aside like a man slapped in passing with no time to react. No one answered. There was nothing to refute because my sentence wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. It reflected the truth about them, a truth they knew but never wanted to face. I stood tall and let the silence run. The air seemed to thicken, each breath suddenly audible. The quiet no longer belonged to me, it belonged to them. I was no longer the one under scrutiny, they were. An older man in the waiting row cleared his throat, then went still, as if afraid to be pulled in. A young woman glanced at me, hesitation flashing in her eyes before she looked away. The whole lobby, a place that had been buzzing with derisive laughter, was now hushed, pressed flat by an undeniable truth. I didn't need to win with back and forth. The real win was that I'd kept my composure, and they hadn't. The smirks were gone. The sharp tones had died. Even the murmurs had faded. I slid the folder into my case with a crisp motion. Then I looked at Linda, my eyes no longer tight, only calm. The calm of someone who sees the play for what it is. Maybe I didn't come here just to withdraw funds today. I came to remind you that every system has a memory. And unlike people, that memory doesn't know prejudice. Linda bowed her head, saying nothing. Harris turned his body away, hiding his eyes. Clark pressed his lips together and, for the first time since I walked in, chose silence. They all understood. My words weren't just for them, but for every witness who'd watched this from start to finish. I took a step and left a heavy stillness behind me. I didn't need applause or nods of approval. That raw, awkward quiet had become the acknowledgement. And I knew that moment would cling to them longer than any argument. Because sometimes, silence is the heaviest sentence of all. One question remained. Would they bury this silence in forgetfulness, or carry it as a scar, a reminder of the bias they themselves had exposed? I closed my case and turned toward the door. My footsteps tapped evenly across the marble, echoing through the high lobby. No one spoke. No goodbyes. No late-blooming explanations. Behind me, a room full of people became a graveyard for laughter, freshly snuffed out. I didn't need to look back. I knew those faces well enough. Linda still bowed to the keyboard, clinging to it like a shelter. Harris likely stood rigid, his gaze lowered, heavy with embarrassment. And Clark, the loudest of them all, was surely swallowing hard, searching for a private excuse. They were buried under one noun: silence. Not ordinary silence. A thick, clotted quiet like fog over a battlefield after a loss. The silence of people who had been exposed, down to the bone, undeniable, indefensible. My hand found the door, the metal cooled my fingertips. I paused for a beat, letting the hush behind me deepen. That silence no longer belonged to me. It was the sentence they had to carry. Then I pushed the door. Daylight poured in, bright, unfiltered. I stepped out, leaving behind a room heavy with the very prejudice they'd thought they could hide beneath procedure. The street breeze met me, clean and cool. I drew a long breath, as if escaping a cramped cell. But a question still rang in my head, not just for me, but for anyone hearing this story. How many more times will Black people be asked to prove themselves? How many more times must they hand over extra papers, extra proof, extra explanations, only because of their skin? And how many more times will truth speak for itself, louder than any defense? I walked on, letting the question hang. It has no neat answer. Everyone who hears it will find their own. In their experience, in their memory, in the moments they witness injustice with their own eyes. The bank door closed behind me, but the story didn't. It stayed open, like a wound not yet healed, like a melody cut short that forces you to keep thinking. That's the echo I wanted to leave, an echo that won't let anyone in that room or anyone who witnessed it turn away and forget. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.